So on the screen right now should be the budget development process. Before I go into it, there are a couple of things that we need to be cognizant of. There's a lot of conversation taking place right now in terms of if we find ourselves in an extended suspension of on-site classes for students. What does that mean in terms of board votes and board member elections? That's a real conversation that's taking place right now with the New York State Education Department and several statewide organizations. There are mixed approaches. A popular approach amongst superintendents, I would say across New York State, is to in fact allow boards of education to have the same authority that municipalities now have for the passage of budgets if the budget is in fact, the budget levy is in fact below the established tax cap. So I want to clarify that again. One piece of that is to calling for legislation to allow boards of education to approve budgets in the same manner that municipalities currently have on the books, which means boards acting on a budget if the tax levy is below the calculated tax cap for the school district. As it relates to Board of Education members, one piece of that is to allow incumbent board members to term to be extended for an additional year as we move forward. So again, that's only one proposal. There are multiple proposals on the table, and the New York State Education Department, New York State School Boards Association, New York State Council of School Superintendents, many organizations are in the conversation right now to try to find a consensus. I'm hoping by the end of the week, we'll find a consensus because of all the other regulatory timelines that we have to follow, such as tonight's meeting of adopting language for a budget and a 45-day notice. Those things have not been suspended. And so subsequently, that's why we're having the meeting tonight. And subsequently, we'll have those notices going into newspaper in accordance with the established timelines. Related to that, too, is a big question in terms of state aid. Right now, we have no additional news on state aid. The telltale sign will be where will the state come out with their budget. If we hear that the state is delaying their budget process, clearly that would be a sign that the school budget will also be delayed. So with that being said, I'm just going to quickly walk through some of these slides. Again, some of them the board has seen. The first slide is just a articulation of the school mission and the things that drive our decision making, not only from a budget process, but from an everyday operational process. Here is the budget goals in terms of fiscal responsibility. And I think as a school district, we have been very responsible from a fiscal perspective, not only having extremely low per pupil costs, but also having very high results for performance for students. And so we're pleased with the progress in terms of fiscal responsibility. This kind of drives the three pieces that we look at in terms of what we want the budget to achieve. Again, the focus is on looking at what we do through an equity lens. In other words, are we being fair to the various differences that our students bring to the table? Are we recognizing those differences, maximizing those differences, and giving students a varied approach to maximize their respective talents? And so in a nutshell, that's what this slide indicates. This talks about, as we look at the budget, the things that we're proposing, what's the value add aspects to it in terms of academic capacity. We look at class size and class compositions in terms of who are the students, what are their various needs. In terms of equity supports, we try to have service follow needs and try to have very targeted supports to address the various needs of students, from everything from academic intervention to acceleration to special education to ELL, you name it. We want to try to address the various needs of our students. Academic rigor is the notion that we constantly trying to ensure that the courses that we're offering are in fact preparing students for the next level, be it college or careers after they leave Shen. The effectiveness piece of it, again, always trying to strategically repurpose to maximize our resources. That's a big part of our budget process, a big part of our administration. How do we ensure that we're maximizing every dollar that's invested in the school system? And personnel is a big part of that, because recognizing that we do a significant portion of the school budget goes towards personnel and benefits. The slide to the side is a reflection of the revenue and tax cap, which we'll talk through later. but something you just want to point out is that when we look at our tax rate on the average over the past 3 years is actually a negative. So for the situation where we are right now from an economic situation, we certainly know that our tax levy has been pretty low over the years and provide us an opportunity to continue programs into the future. Some things to point out in terms of how we structure the thought process. There's certain mandated contractual costs that we have to address. Health insurance is a big cost piece. Retirement pension costs is a big cost piece. And collective bargaining, we're in the process now of negotiating with one of our larger bargaining unit, the CSEA unit. So again, we have to think about those cost implications, not only in this year's budget, but for future year's budget. From the instructional lens, we're looking at equity and outcomes. We're looking at special education. We're looking at enrollment. We're looking at mental health. We're looking at alternative schedule. We're looking at curriculum enhancements as the standards change for New York. We're looking at some articulation agreements to additional courses in the CTE pathways. From the operational piece, we continually trying to ensure that we have classrooms where the rooms themselves, the furniture in classrooms, are engaging and captivating students in terms of being learners, and certainly creating that environment where kids are truly turned on to learning. We're looking at safety is always an ongoing piece for us as a school district as well. So just to kind of recap some of the major cost structures, health insurance, we anticipate right now to be flat for the coming year's budget. And that's a lot of work by many people in terms of analyzing our plans, in terms of being a part of some consortium, in terms of exercising some self-insurance options. Again, trying to ensure that we're providing solid benefits to our employees and trying to minimize or contain the overall increase, which you see right now in the 2021 budget. We're anticipating about a 2% adjustment in health insurance, which when you think about what's happening around us, that's pretty remarkable in many ways. For the retirement pension costs, as you see here, when you look at retirement pension costs, we certainly mindful of the fact that we have to contribute towards the pension costs for our employees. And you see the teacher retirement increase is anticipated about 9.5%, or about $6.9 million. The employee retirement system, which is largely our support staffers, is about 14.6%, which is about $4.5 million cost impact. So we're certainly mindful of those type things. As I mentioned before, we're in the process of going through negotiation with CSEA, which right now has about 687 full-time members, which means we actually have more bodies than 687. But when we translate it to a full-time equivalency, it's about 687 members. And so clearly that's something that we have to take into consideration as we move forward. The next piece that I want to talk about is the equity and outcomes piece. Clearly, one of our larger growing population of student needs is in E&L. So we're looking to add some additional capacity in E&L to address those type things. And we also have a growing for math acceleration at elementary level. And certainly trying to add some capacity to, again, meet the needs of those students. Special education continue to be an area that we're focused on. Last year we implemented a MOVE program, and for the coming year we're looking to expand that capacity somewhat. So we're going to continue to look at the MOVE program, and there could be some cost implications. Outside placements, we're in the process of going through CSEs right now. Even in the current COVID-19 situation, CSE meetings are still being held remotely, and so we want to see how those things pan out and implications for 2021. Enrollment is a big piece of it. We are somewhat stabilized in terms of enrollment, so there could be some potential reduction in K-5. Again, we're watching that very closely, and we'll watch that for the next several weeks here in terms of the budgetary implication of that as well. And the last two pieces here are the two courses that the board approved recently, and we're pleased to try to bring those courses on in September of 2020. Alternative schedule is a big focus for us. And when you think about right now is an ideal time. When you think about in a remote platform, having an alternative schedule would have been a godsend in many ways, because it would allow us to slow down the process in terms of the amount of content that kids are getting on a daily basis, and or the amount of content that teachers are expected to transmit on a daily basis. And even without an alternative schedule, we're still very much looking at how we're going to schedule that if we find ourselves in a longer term suspension of on-site learning, because it has to be in a way that's manageable to both teachers and staff. And so we certainly want to continue our focus on alternative schedule for the coming year. Mental health and wellness is a big piece of it. We know it's a continuous piece, and we're seeing it now, particularly now in the situation we are in, recognizing that we're trying to do everything from virtual to telecommunication to support our students. Our situation, our contract with Saratoga Center for the Family continues. They continue to try to support students virtually or otherwise, and so that's a big piece that we want to make sure we continue into 2021 as well. Curriculum enhancements and next gen standards is a big piece of it, as I mentioned before, and technology. It's so ironic because we have spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of focus on integration of technology over the years. In many ways, it's a good thing that we did, because we were able to, I'd say, relatively seamlessly transition towards this virtual platform with the integration of Chromebooks that we have. And certainly there's a lot of lessons learned from the current condition in terms of some gaps that we still have that we need to ensure that we're addressing in the coming budget as well. Tuitions, again, we just have some ongoing outside placement tuitions that we want to continue. Repurposing is a big piece of it in terms of, again, looking at some of the things that we spend money on and how can we realize some savings or some reductions in expenditures for the coming year. And that's what represents some of those type things. And even some other courses, some things related to athletics, we're looking at some expanded opportunities for some students and some contractual pieces that we need to shore up as we move into the coming year. The classroom piece, as I mentioned before, a big part of it is trying to transition slowly into a furniture replacement cycle, recognizing that we cannot do this in any one budget cycle. Quite frankly, the dollar amount is too large. So we're trying to, on an annual basis, do some transitioning of classroom furniture to be much more future ready in terms of the furniture that we have in our classrooms. Similar, as I mentioned, safety before, looking at emergency texting, certainly in this crisis situation, communication is key, and certainly trying to figure out different ways to enhance our communication, including the live streaming of board meetings. And so those kind of some of the things that necessity has struck us, and we need to expedite some of those processes. Operation and maintenance, we continue to focus on professional development for our maintenance staff. And again, this is an ideal situation because of some of the training that our custodian and cleaning staff went through. I think they were much more equipped to do some of the disinfecting and some of the deep cleaning that we had to do with our buildings. So in many ways, again, because of things that we did in the past, it positioned us to be in a better place as we're dealing with the current crisis. And we certainly want to continue to be positioned in the future to do those things that we need to do normally, and or deal with any other unplanned things that currently not on the horizon. Transportation, similarly, some investment in safety, and human resources trying to go online. And again, the times speak to that. There's so many processes that we still have paper processes, and we're trying to push those online under this current crisis. So the current situation actually forced us to, again, expedite some of the things that we thought we had some time to do, and put those things closer on the priority list than not. So with all that being said, a big focus is looking at some retirees. Right now we have 15 retirees, and trying to leverage those resources. What I mean by that, recognizing that if someone retires at a higher salary and we hire someone back at a lower salary, there's a differential, and that differential is used to offset a lot of the things that I just mentioned before. So we try to keep the budget footprint relatively stable from one year to the next. This slide just gives you a sense of what we're talking about, just breaking out into larger object categories. Instructional salaries, essentially funds that's going directly to our instructional staff, teachers primarily. So you see a large portion of our budget, almost 36% of our budget goes towards instructional salary. 3%, 3.25% roughly, is going towards administrative salaries, and 16.5% roughly goes towards our support staff salary. So this gives you a good sense of where funds are being invested and in what category of personnel as we move forward. Equipment is a small portion of our budget, but it's a significant portion of our budget in terms of impact. Contractual is a lot of things lumped into contractual. That's everything from a lot of our service agreements, from operation and maintenance to even instructional agreements. So there are many things going to the contractual line in terms of keeping processes going, and contractual obligations that we have, again, to keep processes going. Textbooks and library, this is basically maximizing the state aidable amounts. And so we certainly want to do that every year to maximize the amount of state aid that the district is eligible to realize through textbook and library purchases. BOCES has been a great collaborator for us. Our BOCES line have been fairly, even over the course of the past several years. And as you see here, again, we talk about a slight adjustment in BOCES services from one year to another. There are many, many items that fall into the BOCES service, but it just gives you a sense that BOCES is relatively flat from one year to the next.
Hey,
Supplies,
Oliver,
yes.
can I ask just a quick question on the BOCES?
Sure.
You mind? So typically the BOCES aid is reimbursed the following year. So what we spend this year would be reimbursed next year, correct?
That's correct. BOCES and textbook and transportation and some special education services are what we call expenditure-driven aid. In fact, when I go into the state aid side, I'll elaborate a little bit more on some of those as well.
Okay, that was going to be my question, is if we're not spending it this year because we're out of school, does that affect what we get next year? That's it.
Yeah, obviously it'd be a lower amount as well, correct. Just the last two categories here, then I'm just going to transition some revenues and open up some questions from the board. The benefits, as I said, we hire people. We have about 2,200 bodies, people who work for the school district, and that translates to about 1,600 full-time equivalents. So we hire a lot of people, and I say that because considering the economic times, the school in many ways serve as the economic engine for this community, because there's so many people employed locally by the school district that our actions can impact families in significant ways. And so when people think about the budget, it's not necessarily even about a school budget. Quite frankly, it's about how the school itself is a big economic engine for this community, because people invest in the school and the school reinvests into the community. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle of investment and reinvestment. And I think that's a significant point that people need to understand. And I think that point couldn't be more prominent than right now when you think about we have all our employees who are on a base compensation are still getting paid. Many small businesses cannot afford to do so. However, the school, as a part of our commitment to ensure that we keep people on board and try to be productive in terms of their utilization, is something that we're going to try to do as long as we can continue to afford to do so. But again, it's a great point. I just want to emphasize, as we think about things like benefits, health insurance, retirement, dental, medical, all those things fall into that. Social Security, all those things fall into that benefit category. Transfer of funds is largely our debt service. And as the board know, we have been retiring debt, and we try to do that. So when we bring a new capital project online, the impact on taxpayers is absolutely zero. And as you see here, we're seeing almost a $500,000 reduction in our debt service line. And so we anticipating again, so if we bring a project on board, right now the plan was to a potential vote in September, but clearly we have to reconsider that considering the current situation. But the point of the debt service, again, is to try to keep it relatively flat. So when we bring new projects on board, we're not creating an undue burden on taxpayers. So right now, the budget proposal that we have is $182.5 million. And just to kind of put that in concept, our prior budget was 177. When we look at the pure operational needs, in other words, the things just to keep the current programs going, essentially it's about, with the plus and minuses, in terms of the things that we're saving and dollars we're adding, is about 2.6. And the things that go outside of the plus and minuses between what we're adding the savings is about, again, an additional $108,000. And so when you look at it, the budget is largely focused on trying to maintain current services and utilizing any potential savings for some targeted investments in programs for our students. And so that's the current budget total right now, an increase of 4.7 or 2.6% adjustment in the budget. And I say right now because clearly if things go significantly different over the next couple of weeks, months, we certainly have to revisit this whole equation again. The next slide I want to point out is on the revenue side of the equation. Right now, the revenue picture that we have in there is based upon the governor's budget. In past years, traditionally in the past, and this is certainly not one of those traditional years, and traditionally the legislature would come out with two different budgets. The Senate would come out with one, and the Assembly would come out with one, and then there's a fight between the executive, the Assembly, and the Senate, and then there's a final budget picture. Right now, we don't anticipate that the budget picture will be any rosier than the governor's budget picture. If not, it could be potentially less than what the governor's budget picture was a month ago. So our budget right now is based upon the executive budget, which had very minimal increase for us in foundation aid. And so we recognize that. We back to the question was asked before. There's some building aid is a reimbursable aid, and you see building aid we anticipate to be lower. And the reason why that's lower because we're back to the debt service line. We're spending less on debt service. So you spend less, you get less. Transportation aid is another reimbursable aid. We spend a little slightly more on transportation, so we expected a slightly bit more for reimbursement for transportation aid. Excess cost aid is for certain special education programs that are as the title implies, are very costly. There's some aid reimbursement on that beyond the federal dollars. And again, that's a reimbursement piece. Textbook aid is an expendable aid. We're not expecting any more for textbooks and software and hardware. That's what's combined, textbook, hardware, software, library combined into the line I mentioned before, because we pretty much planning to expend what the reimbursable amount is so we can maximize the reimbursable amount coming back. Similarly, BOCES right now, BOCES aid is based upon what we expected to expend this year. We definitely will have to recalibrate that because probably for a quarter of the year, or should I say a third of the year, maybe things are different. So we have to look at those numbers moving forward into 2021 as well. So there's still some uncertainties as we go through this process and even go through the next several months. Just to put things again in context, property tax is a major source of revenue for the school district. Just to go back to show the point, state aid is roughly 27% of our budget. Property tax is about 70% of our budget. So kind of put those in context as we move forward. And so we're certainly trying to look at property tax and try to minimize the impact of that. And so right now we're looking at a potential 2.9% in the tax levy as we move forward. So that's the current projection as we're looking right now. Just to further, there's some additional revenue sources, smaller revenue sources, but still worthwhile revenue sources, some interest income. And again, when we were into this situation, we were excited because we finally started seeing an increase in income, interest income, and certainly the economic downturn is going to impact that. So that's one of those areas again that we have to revisit based upon how long this whole suspension of the economy will take place. We have to revisit even things like interest income and impact on the budget as we move forward. So with all that being said, just kind of give you a capsulation of the revenue, $3.8 million increase if we go by the tax cap. So the tax cap allows us to increase the tax levy by $3.8 million. Our current budget as proposed, we'll see about a $3.7 million increase. So right now it's a delta of about $73.9 million. So we're pretty much right where the tax cap allowance is as we move forward. Just give you some perspective that, say for instance, if we were to reduce, if we're fortunate and the state decide, hey, we had some additional revenues, blah, 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 things have changed significantly, and we get an additional $640 million and $640,000, I'm sorry, in state aid, that will impact the tax levy by 0.5%. Similarly, if we were to see $1.2 million, that will impact the tax levy by 1%. Conversely, if we make those reductions in the budget, that's also the impact on the tax levy as well, going the opposite way. So this last slide kind of put everything in perspective. The budget we see here is about 2.69. The tax cap allowance will be about 3.0. Our budget right now is 2.98, below the tax cap piece of it. As we move forward, as I said, the delta is about 7.39%.